Both of the characters that launched within the version 2.4 update, being Cardathea and Lupa, have one very big thing in common, being that they're not exactly a big fan of using the Shorekeeper within their teams. The Shorekeeper has dominated the meta ever since her release in version 1.3, but the more time passes, the more I feel that Kuro Games is trying to minimize her. So let's talk about the potential downfall of the Generalist healers. Now obviously, I don't think the power of the Generalist healers needs to be stated. Everyone knows why characters like Verena and Shorekeeper are as valued as they are in the game, and honestly, I don't really feel like I need to spend the time to explain why they're so good. From short field times to incredibly powerful buffs that can be utilized by every team in the game, Shorekeeper and Verena truly are some of the pillars of WuWa's meta community. This has caused some issues, however. Not only is team building extremely limited considering the low amount of healers that we do have, but it's also incredibly easy to simply power creep new healers because what they offer to the team is incredibly simplistic. All you need to do is give a character the exact same outro skill buff, a slightly better built-in buff, and then the same amount of field time. Because that's the only thing Generalist healers are known for, their buffing and their low amount of field time. Simply having better heals would not just make you a better character, because healing is not the reason we use these Generalist characters. It's always been about the buffs and the field time. So ultimately, the Generalist healer role is one that is simply way too, well, simple for the game. They've always been a constant in team building, so now Kuro is simply trying to minimize the impact of these characters. And how are they doing it? Well, simple, by giving unique utilities. There's 3 characters I can think of that replace characters like Shorekeeper and Verena within various teams that have unique utilities of their own that actually make them worth using. These characters being Spectro Rover within the Spectro Frazzle teams, Aero Rover within the Aero Erosion team, and then Lupa within the Mono Fusion teams. So let's talk about them a bit, starting with Spectro Rover. Spectro Rover is obviously the most scuffed one on the list, I think everyone agrees with that. Because Spectro Rover's optimal usage is not one that Kuro ever intended to exist. Sure, they gave Spectro Frazzle application in 2.0, but they still didn't expect us to start using Spectro Rover as a healer, which is on them. The only reason that Spectro Rover as a healer actually works is because their 4th sequence allows them to heal after using their Resonance Liberation, making them able to trigger the effect for Rejuvenating Glow without needing to run one of the Originite weapons. The healing on this sequence, however, is quite low, meaning that using Spectro Rover as a healer is something you can only really do if you're confident about your dodging capabilities. If you're not good at dodging, it's best to just run Spectro Rover on an Eternal Radiance build and still use someone like Verena or Shorekeeper within your team. But this is not the optimal thing to do. If you are running a healer Spectro Rover, the utility that they bring into the team is obviously that of Spectro Frazzle application, as well as reducing the spectral resistance of the enemy. The ability to apply Spectro Frazzle is incredibly relevant for both DPS Phoebe as well as Zani. For Zani, Spectro Rover is basically your only option if you do not have Phoebe, because Spectro Frazzle application is directly converted into Forte for Zani to spend with her heavy attacks. So ultimately, Spectro Frazzle application is required in order for Zani to do her damage. As for Phoebe, the same thing applies. You need Spectro Frazzle to be on the enemy in order to get the 256% damage amplification that Phoebe has within her kit. For Phoebe, the amount is less relevant than for Zani, but you still need the Frazzle application itself in order to deal good damage on your Phoebe. However, then again, the Frazzle application does once again become relevant for Phoebe, considering the fact that the Eternal Radiance set has an additional buff when the Spectro Frazzle count on enemies reaches 10, which just so happens to be the exact amount of stacks applied by Spectro Rover. So aside from the fact that Spectro Rover's healing is a complete joke, I would say that Spectro Rover is a pretty efficient Shorekeeper or Verena replacement, and is in my opinion well designed. Then we go to Aero Rover, however. The Aero Rover, however, is not as intelligently designed in my opinion. Aero Rover does not have the ability to apply Aero Erosion, this job instead going to Shikona. The only way to actually apply Aero Erosion using the Aero Rover is by simply converting a different DOT into Erosion. However, in most teams where using Aero Rover, this is not even a thing that you are capable of doing. Sure, Shakona can apply Spectro Frazzle and then you can convert that using Aero Rover, but why not just have Shakona apply Aero Erosion itself instead? That's just infinitely more efficient. Where Aero Rover's additional utility comes in is the form of buffing. Buffing is something that is already done by characters like Shorekeeper or Verena, but the thing that makes Aero Rover special is that Aero Rover specifically buffs Aero Erosion by increasing its cap count. This is something that not a single other character is able to do aside from an S2 Cardathea. They also give Aero damage amplification thanks to their signature weapon. However, I really don't want to focus on that, that's just a boring stat buff. The increased cap for Aero Erosion is what's so interesting to me. It's in my opinion a very good way in order to buff the Aero Erosion team, because with the increase in stacks that Aero Erosion can get, the damage output from Aero Erosion itself can actually become pretty major within a team. So in concept, this was a good idea. Pair the increase in stack count for Aero Erosion with Shakona's ability to buff Aero Erosion damage directly through damage amplification, and you get yourself a pretty good amount of damage output that might even be worth running the two together. So within Aero Rover's own kit, I don't find many issues aside from them just being inconsistent to use. No, where my issues come in is with the way Cardathea was designed, because she gets specific buffs based on how many stacks of Aero Erosion there are on the enemy. Now this itself would be completely fine if the buffs didn't go up to 6 stacks. The buffs should have capped out at 3 stacks in my opinion. During the 1.0 era, characters felt extremely self-sufficient. However, in recent times, characters feel like they rely more and more on teammates, and Cardathea being unable to fully utilize her kit unless she uses one specific character is in my opinion an incredibly boring way of making us use the Aero Rover. Now I'm by no means saying that Cardathea needs Aero Rover. That would be simply wrong of me to say. Like, just straight up wrong, she can literally solo towers. So it's not a thing where Cardathea doesn't do enough damage without Aero Rover, it just feels like an incredibly cheap and boring way of making a character the best in slot option when you could have handled it in a way better manner. And then we finally get to Lupa. I've been very vocal in past videos about how I believe that Lupa is an incredibly well-designed unit, and accomplishes her role perfectly. Not only is she the best third slot character when it comes to the Mono Fusion team, she's also plenty powerful in other Mono Fusion based compositions. Whereas Spectro Rover's viability as a healer was purely accidental, and where Aero Rover's feels incredibly forced, Lupa is in my opinion the perfect blend between being intended to be the best in slot in a certain team, but also not being best in slot in a boring way. You could say that Lupa and Aero Rover with Cardathea are not that far apart. Cardathea gets specific buffs within her kit that she can only access if she has Aero Rover in her team, whereas Lupa has specific buffs in her kit that can only be fully utilized if you're in a Mono Fusion team. But you see the difference there? Cardathea relies on one specific character for her buffs, whereas Lupa just requires an element that has plenty of good characters in it, like Mortefi, Brant, Chongli, and Encore. Lupa replacing Shorekeeper also feels way more natural than Aero Rover and Spectro Rover. Spectro Rover's healing is so insanely mediocre that ultimately, you're not getting a healer on your team, which means you have to be good at dodging. That's how bad the healing is. You're not going to be able to trust that to keep you alive. Aero Rover does all the things that Shorekeeper does, being able to buff as well as heal. However, their rotation is among the more clunky in the game, and I've ranted enough and enough about how forced the synergy between Aero Rover and Cardathea feels. But for Lupa and her best in slot team, it makes sense. She may not be capable of healing, but she does have the free dodges that Shorekeeper provides, and healing and shielding is covered by Brant in her best in slot team already. Lupa's buffs are also incredibly non-specific. All of her buffs are able to work on every single fusion character, except maybe the basic attack damage buffing. And even if you're not in a Mono Fusion team, you are still capable of utilizing Lupa's buffs, just to a lesser degree. You still get the full extent of the attack buff, the full extent of her signature weapon, her signature set, etc. So unlike the Aero Rover, Lupa doesn't need a specific synergy with one specific mechanic within her kit. She's good with every single fusion character, which is why she is in my opinion way better designed. but that's just my opinion. What do you think of the quote-unquote shorekeeper replacements? Let me know in the comments down below. And while you're down there, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Additionally, if you have any questions, be sure to join my Discord, which is linked in the description below. I'm pretty active in there, so there's a pretty good chance I'll respond to your question. If you just want to see more of me, be sure to check out my second channel. I primarily talk about punishing Grey Raven, but I'll upload basically anything that I'm interested in. But that'll be all from me. Peace.